it's the same idea every time, but let's go back into it. So, okay, so we're going to begin with the parasha. This week's parasha, Parashat Vayeshev, a fascinating parasha, I always mention. But the truth is, this parasha is the beginning and the opening of these next 4 parashiot, and are going to continue in all the same theme. And that is the story of Yosef and the brothers. And really what happens going forward is pretty much a understanding of, or trying to figure out Yosef's journey from a young age of 17 all the way to his journey through Egypt, where he becomes viceroy, until Yaakov ultimately goes there with the whole family, ends up in Egypt, and later passes away. So really the from now till the very end of Sefer Bereshit is all really one story, and we have to kind of try and figure out what's going on. One of the, I would say, most gut-wrenching and down-to-earth narratives in the Torah is Yosef, the favored son, who's bent on trying to be on his father's good side. He brings the evil reports, which will never make him very popular, to his father. And it's very troubling. It's something which many people can relate to just from a practical perspective. We don't find through the biblical narrative much of, such concepts which are, so relatable on so many levels, hatred of, sibling rivalry, seeming sibling rivalry, just the whole concept of a favored child, one child being more favored than others. These are things which are very, very common, unfortunately, and very, very relatable. So I want to kind of work through some of the go ahead.
By telling to his brother about his dreams, they already were eating. So now he tells them the dreams, so they hate him even more.
Right. Let's go one at a time. Okay. Hi, Ellen. So
hi. Good evening. Hi, Dan.
We just began. We said this parasha is literally one of the gut-wrenching parashiot, and also one of the most down-to-earth parashiot, because people often relate to the concept of one of the children being favored, and and sibling rivalry. There's a lot going on this week's parasha, which we kind of have to try and get to the bottom of. But today I chose a topic which I haven't really ever tried to figure out, and I want to work through together, Be'ezrat Hashem, a little bit of what's going on over here. And the topic I want to speak about is Yaakov. Yaakov, seemingly, his passivity is astounding. He is not really seemingly paying much attention to what's going on. He's not really understanding the depth of the devastation of what's going on, the rift, between the brothers and Yosef is so starkly obvious, and yet Yaakov is just kind of very passive about it. Not only is he passive about it, it almost sounds like he's okay with it. Why do I say that? Because it doesn't seem to be that Yaakov really rebukes Yosef very much. So, there's this really dangerous and concerning situation developing, and Yaakov's not jumping on the gun and saying, "Hey, enough's enough." So I want to go through the theme, see how we go through the different, different pieces in the Torah, different psukim, and we'll see if we can get any deeper understanding of what's going on. So I'm just going to pull up the psukim, and let's see if we can get anywhere. Second, I'm going to share my screen.
That's fine.
Hi, Shlomo.
Hi.
Okay. All right. So we are Bereshit Lamed Zayin Bet Ele Toldot Yaakov Yosef. So Vayeshu Yaakov Beretz Meguray Aviv Beretz Canaan, the first pasuk, and we begin the parasha as follows. First pasuk. This is the line of Jacob, Yosef, at 17 years of age. Haya ro'eh et echav batzon. He is tending to the flock with his brothers. V'hu na'ar et bnei Bilha bet bnei Zilpah. And he is na'ar, interesting word over here. Let's just keep that in our dictionary. Et bnei Bilha bet bnei Zilpah, helping out his brothers. Interesting, not bnei Le'ah, but bnei Bilha bet bnei Zilpah, the sons of Bilha, sons of Zilpah. Neshe Aviv, Dan, what you asked last week, they're suddenly referred to over here as the wives of his father, not the maidservants of his father. I just saw now Ramban points out that after Rachel passed away, then suddenly they're called the wives. So Rachel and Leah have passed, and now Bilha and Shivcha are called wives. Okay.
Interesting that Leah is omitted.
Yeah, very interesting. Leah is omitted. And Yosef brings the bad reports of them to his father Yaakov. Okay. Next pasuk. Israel ahavet Yosef mikol banav, and Israel and Yaakov. We spoke about this last week. Change of names. Sometimes Israel, sometimes Yaakov. Israel it starts off Ele Toldot Yaakov, then it goes to Israel. Okay, and Israel goes and loves Yosef mikol banav, from all of his sons. Ki ben zekunim hu lo. Pasuk gives a reason why he shows this extra love, this favoritism. For he was a child of his old age, simply put. Ve'asa lo kitonet pasim. He made for him special coat, ornamented tunic, the way translated here. Pasuk Dalet, probably a direct result of the love of Yaakov to Yosef. Nobody likes that. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, and they hated him, and they could not speak a friendly word to him. Okay, psukim which seem to be very, very difficult to understand. And this is what we started off with. So let's try and figure this out one by one. We've got Yaakov over here, who is, first of all, watching this develop, and he's saying nothing. He's tolerating Yosef's behavior. Yosef is trying to find favor in his father's eyes, and he comes and gives this evil talk, brings all the bad gossip about his brothers. Yaakov says nothing. In fact, Yaakov favors his son more than any of the others. And perhaps, and then as a result that we mentioned, vayisneu oto, they actually hate him as a result of this kind of seemingly the favoritism going on over here. And what's perhaps even more challenging is he makes it blatantly obvious. He makes for Yosef this kitonet pasim, this kind of special coat, which makes them feel a little more like low level, and this guy's been promoted. What's going on? What is going on with this behavior of Yaakov? So just before we delve into it a little bit deeper, see Rashi. Rashi says, Ki ben zikunim hu lo. Rashi says something interesting. Simply put, Shnolad lo le'ed ziknuto. He was a son of his old age. Because he was born when he was old. It's like one of the youngest sons. Benjamin was born afterwards, but that's one of the simple explanations. Says Rashi, V'unklus tirgem, and Unklus translates it, Bar Chakib hu le. He is the wise son to him. Why? Kol ma shlamad mishem ve'ever masar lo. Whatever he had learned from Shem and Ever, he had taught him. Remember, we spoke about this in the past, that on Yaakov's way to Lavan, he spends 14 years, which we know nothing about. Rashi points out that, based on the Gemara, that for 14 years, he goes and stops off in the yeshiva of Shem Ever. Why? In order to kind of give him the background. You're going on a mission. You're going to build the Jewish people. You're going to be in a house in a situation which is really difficult because you're going to be surrounded by a lot of no goodniks, to put it mildly, more like scandalous traitors, like Lavan and the likes. But he needs to prepare for this. So what does he do? He goes and studies Torah. Biakum Kamenetsky points out, it wasn't just any Torah. He didn't go to a random yeshiva. He went to the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. Who's Shem and who's Ever? So Shem, one second, Dan. So Shem is Shem ben Noach, the man who survived the flood. Can you imagine? The man who saw the world before and the world after. The man who was able to see what caused the world to completely be destroyed and how the world began its new growth. That's something which Yaakov needs to kind of keep in his pocket when he's building Klal Yisrael, where to keep away from and how to rebuild. The other person who he learned from was Ever. Ever was one of those people who was the Dor HaFlaga, the whole thing with the Tower of Babel, where they want to go ahead and be united for one reason, to go and be and fight God. And Ever had this kind of opposite experience whereby people were united. They weren't stealing from each other like before Noach time, where the whole world got destroyed because people were so selfish. But rather it was the other way around. It was a result of everyone being united for one singular reason, but that reason was for wrong reasons. That was just to be, anti-God. So Yaakov kind of picks up all this, keeps it in his baggage, and it seems to be this specific Torah of Shem ve'Ever, Masar lo, he gave over to Yosef. Okay? Again, another reason why he gets special, secret codes given over to him, not the brothers. What's going on? Davar acher, last piece in Rashi, another explanation, she'aziv ikonim shelo dome lo. His facial features were literally similar, so he had this kind of, unbelievable relationship with him because, he looked like me, natural favoritism. Dan.
Well, a couple points, Rabbi. I have problems with the idea that Yaakov attended a yeshiva. A yeshiva, if it was headed by Shem, who were the students? We're talking about Canaanites in this land. Who were the students of a yeshiva besides Joseph or Jacob, I mean?
Well,
that's one.
When we talk about yeshiva, I don't necessarily mean, have a building with a dormitory and, yeshiva means a place of study. So
well, exactly. So a place of study. So one person as a student?
Back in the day, very possible. I don't know of any other students who had kind of enlisted in the yeshiva. But when we talk about yeshiva, that means he was sitting down to learn solely from these two rabbis.
Okay. And the other one is, the comment here is another explanation. His facial features were similar to his. Isn't that a little bit of narcissism? I mean, that's, to me, that's not what I would consider a...
You would expect more from Yaakov, you're saying?
Sorry?
You'd expect a little bit more from Yaakov.
Absolutely.
Right, okay.
That would be
Yeah.
the last thing I'd expect him to say. I like him because he looks like me.
So I think this Rashi does need some sort of explanation, but I think the concept of kiben zekunim hulo, which almost gives a free ticket out of jail to Yosef to behave how he pleases, is all the more troubling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, the Gemara in Shabbat says the following. So this whole favoritism is clearly not a good thing. We said that the favoritism, after he gets to Ketonah Pasim and he's really clearly the beloved child, but it's very clear. The fact that his brothers thought that Yaakov loved him more than the other brothers, Mikol Echav, vayisnu oto. As a direct result, they hate him. So it's almost as if the way the Torah portrays this scenario is that Yaakov is kind of to blame. That's what Pasuk says. Anyone disagree?
He's kind of what, sorry?
Yaakov is actually kind of to blame for what transpires afterwards, because the hatred is a very normal result of clear favoritism, to such a level especially. Don't forget who we're talking about.
There's
Context.
a huge amount of psychological study from psychiatrists and psychologists about children that feel deprived because they feel the parent favored one child over the other. Caused a huge amount of strife and crime even.
So thank you, Dan. So rolling off what Dan just said, the Gemara in Shabbat, Daf 10b, says as follows. Yudam bet, ve'amar Rava bar Machasya, amar Rav Chama bar Guria, amar Rav, source 3. Le'olam al yeshane adam beno ben habanim. A person should never distinguish one of his sons from them amongst the others. You don't give preferential treatment to one. Why? Where do we see this? Should be spilled mishkal shnei slaim meilat, because due to the weight of 2 selah of fine wool, Shnatani Yaakov Yosef yoter mishabanav, gave him this coat. It's this little this seemingly insignificant coat. Nitkanu bo echav, his brothers became jealous of him. And as a result, the matter unfolded, and our forefathers descended to Egypt. So really, we entered Galut pretty much as a result of Yaakov's seeming preferential treatment to Yosef over the brothers. Okay, so, as Dan stated before, there's much psychological research about how bad and how damaging the concept of someone getting preferred treatment over another sibling. So the Gemara says this is one of the things we learn from these psukim, that Yaakov seemingly wasn't great. Now the Gemara doesn't really talk about it was a negative about Yaakov. The Seforno, Ravadio Misforno, one of the great Italian medieval commentators, says it quite explicitly. The Gemara just says a person shouldn't do it because as a result of what happened with Yosef, then we ended up in Egypt. Sforno says it very explicit. Sforno in source number 4, 37:4. And the brothers saw that Yaakov loved Yosef more than them. Says Sforno, ubazet ta'a Yaakov, and here Yaakov had committed an error, l'shanot laben ben habanim, allowing the love of his heart for Yosef to become visible, so that through the preferential treatment which Yaakov felt perhaps in his heart was now kind of brought out to the open. So here the Seforno penalizes Yaakov for his behavior, very straightforward, and kind of puts it on the table. This was not okay. Again, it's not for us to say. It should be someone like the Seforno to be able to point the finger to it. So yeah, I think it behooves us to try and understand a little bit what is really going on over here. I mean, what is going on with Yosef? What is going on with Yaakov, just kind of letting it go? There's so much, talking points where we can begin. Last year we gave, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, every year we tried to give another angle on trying to understand another aspect of the Shvatim tribes, what they were thinking. They want to murder their brother. Yosef, what's he thinking? He wants to really kind of pull their eyes out. Yaakov, what's he thinking? And, there's so many moving parts throughout these 4 parashiyot from now until the end of the Sefer Bereshit, which really seemingly makes no sense. I think before we continue, I mention this every year when we talk about these parashiyot because it's so important as a way of introduction, that we have to always remember the context of who we're talking about. 2 years ago, I mentioned the Midrash. I won't repeat it now about the Asar Malchut, but I do want to mention one thing. When we talk about the Shvatim, the tribes, we're talking about the 12 tribes which were on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. To make it onto the breastplate, you had to be top of the charts. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, our great forefathers, and then next came the Shvatim. There wasn't a Yitzchak and an Ishmael. There wasn't a Yaakov and Esav. There was 12 Shvatim, 12 tribes, all equal in greatness and speciality. And the Jews later on adopted those tribes' names, and each tribe has its direction. Yaakov gives them blessings, and essentially that's really the direction until today, where there's different paths and perhaps different ways of how one can attain the connection to God by virtue of the specific path of the different tribes. So when we talk about the Shvatim, when we talk about Yaakov, when we talk about Yosef, we have to always be very careful how we talk about it to understand that these people are not people of, that we can see eye to eye with. This is not about, oh, Yaakov, you're really botched up. Oh, Yosef, you're a lousy criminal. Yehuda, Reuven, you're really, just plain cutthroat murderers. Passionless or passionate bloodlusts who really don't care anything about brotherly love and just really have their own agenda. They're prepared to allow their mourning father to live like that for 22 years without telling him the truth. There's so much going on over here which literally makes no sense, even on a simplistic level, however you want to try and explain it. So again, I think if we put it into context, to understand these are talking about the greats of the greats of the great. And as we mentioned very often in these classes, that the Torah often magnifies an issue so that we can learn from it. If we would see it on the table, perhaps we wouldn't see it the way we see it through the lens of the Torah. But if we magnify it, and as the way the Torah does, like this Gemara in Shabbat, which says, make sure you don't show any favoritism. Not about favoritism to a level of, oh my gosh, I'm going to show this more than that, and give this child a big present and the little child a tiny present. We're talking about subtleties, but the Torah magnifies it to be able for us to understand and relate to how we can take a practical lesson from it. So let's try and go through the parasha and try and understand the psukim one by one. So we began like this. Yosef is 17 years old. All in all, he's a young lad. The Torah seems to say a word over here which is superfluous. Anyone can point out something which is a little bit extra in the psukim over here?
In general, that first pasuk is very interesting because there's a lot of opposites. or repetitions in general, right? There's Vayishev be'eretz migurei aviv, and then it's kind of Eretz Canaan. Like, is that not already clear? Na'ar and Ben Shvaisre, it's kind of overemphasizing the fact that he is within a certain age range. He's young. There's the word love repeats itself a number of times. Age, Na'ar, as opposed to Ben Zikunim. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so that's exactly the one I wanted. So the Torah adds in this word v'hu na'ar, and he is a lad. Seemingly out of, in terms of context, as Ellen correctly pointed out, we already know if he's 17 years old, we kind of get a bit of a, an understanding of his age bracket. So why does the Torah kind of stress this word v'hu na'ar? So Rashi says as follows. Rashi immediately jumps on this. V'hu na'ar, and Rashi almost takes it as a derogatory term towards Yosef. Shaya oseh ma'aseh na'arut. Joseph's actions were childish. What did he do? Metaken b'sa'aro, he's playing with his hair, dressing it up. Mashmesh be'enav, don't forget Yosef was a very extremely attractive young lad, as we know later with the story of Potiphar's wife. He's touching up his eyes. Kadesh yenirei yafeh. Always appear good looking. He's very, almost obsessed with his good looks. Rashi, we're not talking about some magazine. Yeah? Sorry.
He was a teenager. He was a teenager.
But it seems to be this was, almost obsessive in nature. Rashi's pointing this out to say that the Torah is saying v'hu na'ar because the Torah is emphasizing that what he's doing is more than just regular stuff. It's almost, extreme childish behavior.
Can we go back to one point?
Sure.
Back there. So what I'm reading is Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wife. Why that repetition in that sense? First of all, he's not one of the tenders of the flocks. He's a helper to the brothers. And the other, of course, is again, because in this case, Leah's missing, 6 of the sons there are Leah's. So they should have been somehow involved there. But the fact that they're separated out tells me that there's got to be more to it than just the omission.
Right. So they're both very good points.
So I don't know what he was doing as a helper to his brothers who were tending flocks. And then from that, you get the idea of evil reports. What could the brothers be possibly doing as an evil report?
Dan, I love it when you come to these classes because you always help me to get to the next point.
Okay, just give me the answer, please.
Okay, so first of all, just your original point about what it means, what's going on over here. So Sforno says he would actually he's teaching them the way. He's kind of helping them out, trying to configure how to do this job. So he being one of the Bnei Gevira, one of the sons of Rachel, the loved wife, versus one of the Bnot, the Bnei Shivcha, versus the maidservant's children, who were kind of maybe a lower level in eyes of some of the Shvatim. So he's kind of, being there to help them out. That's one explanation.
I think it's what's being emphasized here is if you're going out to help mind the flocks, mind the sheep, you're spending a lot of time together, and hence he was able to hear their talk. Now he's tattling like siblings do about each other, right? But to tend the flocks is to be spending a lot of time together.
Right. Okay. So there's also spending a lot of time together in private away from their father. So, there's enough information which his father doesn't have. And if he's seeking to find favor in his father's eyes, this is a great way to give away, the reports about his brother. So Rashi, let's read the next Rashi. The Rashi in this pasuk bet, says at Dibatam Rashi, he brings this evil report to his father. Says exactly what he's talking about.
So now now we have the sons of Leah.
So they do speak about this. Suddenly, where do the Bnei Le'ah come in? And they say, Rashbam says, Ramban says, what is it? Rashbam says, what's happening here is Hayaro Etechav Batzon. He's supposedly being together with his brothers. Who's his brothers? Two wives who are the original wives, Bnei Le'ah, Bnei Rachel. So this is the sons of Le'ah and essentially him who's the son of Rachel. They're hanging out and he is helping out Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah. And in fact, the way the Mefarshim explain it is because he's hanging out more with Bilhah and Zilpah children, because, he feels like he's on par with them. So his other brothers, the sons of Leah, start to hate him. Vayaveh Yosef et dibatam ra'ah el avihem, and Yosef now gives some inside info to his father about the sons of Leah who really hate him. So let's go through Rashi. Are we clear?
I understand what you're saying, but that's not what's written. If you go back up to the point, it doesn't say that he's reporting on the sons of Leah. It's just that he says, and when Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, when his brothers saw that his father loved him more, then they hated him. It doesn't specifically say which specific brothers.
Okay, so the way Rashbam explains it is, it seems to be he was pally with the Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah.
I see.
And that's why it kind of makes a break between the first brothers and the second brothers. Why is he kind of, helping out his other brothers and not helping, or just kind of on par with the other brothers? There seems to be some sort of background over here, which we don't have much information in the pasuk. And then when he comes there, if he's pally with Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah, why would he actually be going and tattletaling on them? So there seems to be this animosity more with the Bnei Le'ah versus the Bnei Bilhah, Bnei Zilpah. So Rashi says, Shayu ochlim ever min achai. They used to eat the flesh cut off from a living animal. One of the Torah prohibitions, you can't eat ever min achai. This is even one of the Noachite prohibitions. Number one. Umezalzelim et bnei hashvachot likrotam avadim. Bnei Le'ah, the sons of Le'ah, were acting as if they were superior to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and calling them slaves. You're the sons of maidservants. V'chashudim al arayot, and finally, that they are suspected of immoral behavior. And Rashi points out, Shloshtam laka, midah keneged midah, we know that there's always tit for tat, and ultimately, they slaughtered a goat for the blood to paint on the coat. So, and they didn't eat it. So basically that's, with regards to what he said about eating from an animal. With regards to the fact that he spoke about them, said that the brothers were servants, he was sold as a servant. He says that they were behaving in immoral behavior. They were involving themselves in immoral behavior. That's what happened with the whole story with Yosef and the wife of Potiphar. So we see this kind of tit for tat. So I don't really want to elaborate on this Rashi specifically, but I thought it's important to just mention that there is like this whole tattletaling aspect going on over here, and that is also obviously strengthening the animosity between them. Yes, Dan.
Well, one point, Rabbi. This is the reports he brought to his father, and his father did nothing.
Oh, this is the question. This is what we're trying to do with today.
But yeah, but what I don't understand is how could the father of Jacob's caliber and potential not educate his sons, not understand the point of you can't do this. This is not acceptable, totally immoral.
So
Where does
you and I see eye to eye. This is exactly
No.
what we're doing today.
Come on, there's something missing here.
Oh, that's what we're trying to do.
This is the people that have the names on the great breastplate. How can you possibly say, well, this is what they were? I just don't understand them.
Okay, let's see if by the end of the class, we'll get a little bit more clarity. We'll see. I think this is a very strong question. I think this is what I want to deal with today, specifically the behavior of Yaakov, where he's A, like you said, not educating. B, he's almost so, his passivity is just astounding in terms of he just continues to love him. He starts giving these elaborate coats. Like, what are you doing? No admonishment. This tolerance towards Yosef's behavior seemingly screams out to us, we need to have some sort of understanding on Yaakov's behavior. Okay. So, Sforno says on Vahu Nar, he said something very interesting. We're talking about a child who's 17 years old. Rashi just pointed out, he's acting very childish. So here's the deal. Says Sforno, Umipnei na'aruto chata. In spite of this, he badmouthed his brothers. This is due ki lo nisa velo hitbonen la'achrit davar, af al pi shaya az maskil me'od. This was due to his being still an adolescent, as Dan said before, not as mature as he should have been, or as his intellect made him appear to be. He was not experienced enough to realize what the ultimate effect of his bad-mouthing his brothers would turn out to be. So even though he was a relatively youngster, don't forget, at the age of 30, he became the viceroy of Egypt. You know, so the foremost political power at the tender age of 17, at the age of 30. At the tender age of 17, he still had a lot to learn. You can imagine his experiences in prison, his experiences away from home, his experiences with all the sibling rivalry and, you know, how he was dealt with, a hard hand, must have kind of beefed him up a little bit. So it seems to be Sforno saying, and he says, as the Gemara in Shabbat says, we are taught that mature wisdom cannot be expected to be found amongst the physically young. As the Mishnah in Avot says, that if you're looking for wisdom, a wise person, an elderly person is like wine. That the older the wine, the greater the taste. So too, a young person versus an old person, a young person's wisdom may be very sharp, may be intellectually savvy, but in terms of life experience, in terms of being able to process things, that a wise person is so much wiser than a younger person. Same thing over here. Yosef was extremely sharp. That I think is very clear. Yosef was intellectually brilliant. Look at his, you know, he managed to win over Paro's, you know, the most powerful ruler in the world at the time, and became the viceroy of Egypt for 40 years. So we're talking about someone literally brilliant. Obviously, he had the, you know, the background, and he had the Siyata Dishmaya, he had the heavenly assistance to be able to get him to the place where he needed to be. But this was clearly something which he was there. However, at the age of 17, he was simply a childish behavior. He was literally an adolescent. He was messing around, and his intellect and his emotional, perhaps, experience wasn't quite on par. And he had a lot of time to learn before he was going to go to become viceroy of Egypt. Just to talk about his intellect, if you look at the Ramban, Nachmanides, later on the Pasuk, the very end of the parasha, we talk about the butler and the baker and the dreams. And Ramban says something fascinating. He says, it should have said, the Pasuk should have said, and he asked them, saying, Instead, I'll treat to you in English. Scripture speaks at length about it. Because he wants to kind of explain who Yosef was. He is a young lad, a slave, and he's asking two very powerful senior officers who hated him, and he was in the house of his master who also hates him now. And every single one of them could really essentially just command his hanging. He had the courage not to be scared of them. And he asked them, and he asked them, with respect, to try to interpret what's happening. And says Ramban 3 words, Ki batach bechokhmato, because he trusted in his wisdom. Because guess what? If he would have messed up and the baker would have got freed, you know what would have happened? Off with his head. You told me I would be killed. Ooh la la. So he's really putting himself in jeopardy over here. Yet Yosef batach bechokhmato, seemingly Yosef had this very strong intellectual intelligence, stronger, incredible intelligence, and he relied on it. Yet, says the foreigner, at this point, when he's going and tattletailing to his father, he's messing up. He doesn't see beyond. He doesn't see the end of the road. He's young. He's v'huna'ar, the Torah stresses. He's not quite made it yet. He's not quite developed yet. Next pasuk, vayachalom Yosef chalom ve'aged le'echav. He has a dream, tells his brothers, probably not such a good idea to tell your brothers a dream about how you're going to be a great guy. But guess what? He turns around and tells them. And the direct result is vayosifu od shnoto, and they hated him even more. Well, yeah. And then we know there's a second dream after that, and they can't even speak to the guy anymore. Says foreigner, the same idea. Gam ze asa michesaron ha'etza kena'ar. This too was an ill-advised move, because had he been more mature, he would have kept the contents of such a dream to himself. Pasuk at the end says, V'Yaakov v'aviv shamar et hadavar. Yaakov kind of kept it in his pocket. See how things are going to work out. Seems to be Yaakov's got some sort of, inner understanding of where's this going. But he doesn't tell the brothers, ooh, you know what, this brother, Yosef, you just, he's all good. He doesn't say that. Eventually he does admonish him. He says, what do you mean? Could it, he doesn't even admonish him. He says, could it be that me and your mother will be there? Your mother's not even alive. But again, this behavior of Yaakov seemingly is inappropriate because Yaakov is not telling him off. He's not putting a stop to this. And he sees the animosity between the brothers. He sees the gap widening more and more, and he's not curbing the tragedy, which is, dwindling quickly. Now, there seems to be another piece over here, which I want to mention very by the way, and then I want to get back to this point about the immaturity. But I want to mention this because it's a bit of an introduction to the next foreigner. We mentioned before that it literally makes no sense what's really going on over here. How could the brothers just be such cold-blooded murderers? I mentioned this in the past. We haven't yet heard of kids coming home from school and they hear the parasha, and guess what? They decide, you know what, Mom, I'm fed up with my little sister. I'm going to sell her. We don't hear that. There's many stories of kids watching movies and suddenly they take knives or they turn to drugs, they turn to all sorts of inappropriate behavior based on what they watch in movies. Because, there's such an effect from, a child's like a sponge, could take everything in. But yet we teach our children all the time about the story of Yosef, and nada. We don't have any violent episodes as a result. Yet we're talking about the Shiftei Kav, the greatest of the great, we just said. And they're selling their brother. In fact, they actually want to kill him. And there's just kind of this point of contention between Reuven. It says, don't kill him, maybe just put him in the pit. And then maybe just sell him. Sforno says like this, what's going on with the brothers? We've mentioned this in previous years, but I thought it's appropriate to mention it now for the next Sforno. After they sell Yosef, seems to be also very strange behavior. You would think the brothers, don't know, feel bad. We see later they felt bad. But the Pasuk says, Vayeshu lechem lechem. They go have Thanksgiving dinner. How appropriate for tonight. They sit down and they have a meal. Says Rashi, says the Sforno, Shelo haya kol ze be'enehem takala u'michshol, shimna'em likvoa seudatam, kemo shaya ra'ui tzadikim kemotam. To demonstrate that what they had done, they sat down to eat a meal because they didn't feel like it was a crime, or that the incident was not something that should interfere with their regular meal. When righteous people became aware of having inadvertently committed the sin, they not only did not celebrate it by eating, but they imposed a fast day or more upon themselves. And the Sforno brings various different places where people felt very bad, and they went and sat to fast, to sit down to fast. Says Sforno, why didn't they sit down to fast? They go and eat as if nothing happened? Business as usual. V'zeh kara lahem, says Sforno, mipnei shechashvu et Yosef lerodef. They felt like Yosef was a rodef. Shekol hakodem lehorgo zacha k'she'en derech hatzion nidach b'huzurat zeh. The brothers had made strenuous efforts to put physical distance between themselves and Joseph in order to avoid any, how do you read that word? Altercation? Okay, altercation. When he had sought them out, in spite of their having signaled clearly they want to avoid him, they felt understandably very threatened. So what happens is, we know the pasuk that when a person comes to kill you, jump up first. Don't wait till they come at you with a knife. Make sure you disarm them first. We're talking about the greats of the greats. We're talking about Yaakov, who by any utterance of his word, people can die. We mentioned last week, Yaakov mentioned something bad about, or 2 weeks ago, where the person who stole the idols of Lavan should die. He didn't realize it was his own wife, Rachel. Rachel dies. This is someone who's shgaga yotzei pi sharit, someone so great, so careful with his words. Little did he know. But the brothers felt that if Yosef is taking their tattletaling to Yaakov, this is danger, danger, danger. Because Yaakov could get mad at them. Wham! It's the end of the story. So they felt they have to get rid of Yosef. Because he is literally, as far as they're concerned, a murderer. And when someone tries to murder you, you go and murder them first. That's basically Sforno's approach to the brothers versus Yosef. Now, we could talk about this at length. There's much discussion to understand this and explain this properly. I didn't want to go into this so much, but I just want to focus on this just to mention the next Sforno in the last 5 minutes that we have. Pasuk says later, next week's parasha, Vayomru, so Yosef comes, what happens? Yosef comes, sees all the brothers, 10 brothers, and he locks them all up. He says, you're all spies. And they start looking at one another, they start saying, Vayomru ish el achiv. They said to one another, Aval hashamim anachu. We are being punished on account of our brother. Alachinu asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho b'itchaneno elenu v'lo shamanu. Al ken ba elenu atzara azot. Tzadikim, when they do a mistake, they analyze what's going on. And there's much discussion exactly what the analysis is going on over here. But seemingly from the pasuk, it says that they didn't take any heed or notice when he pleaded with them. And that is why this is coming together. The reason why this emperor, this ruler of Egypt is being so cruel to them, seemingly did nothing wrong. You know why? This is the hand of God playing over here. We were cruel to our brother. He was beseeching and pleading with us. This is why it's happening to us now. Reuven turns around. And then Reuven jumps in. He says, Halo amarti alechem lemor, al techteu bayeled, those famous words. Reuven says, did I not tell you, do no wrong to the boy? V'lo shamatem, you didn't listen. V'gam damo hineni drash, and now comes the reckoning for his blood. Says Forno, Halo amarti alechem al techteu bayeled. Shelo haya mitkaven lahamitchem. I told you don't hurt the child because he really didn't mean to do what he did as you had imagined. But his actions were childish, where it's just simply immature behavior. As we mentioned before. I'm wondering if Yaakov is perhaps seeing Yosef's behavior in a light of a child who's so brilliant, a child who Va'aviv Shamar et Hadavar, that ultimately he will be the one who will take the Jewish people through Egypt, who will save world order. And yet Yaakov's kind of biding the time to see what will happen. He understands what Yosef's doing now is not correct. But perhaps he doesn't want to kill his self-esteem. He doesn't want to kill Yosef's passion. He doesn't want to unsettle the greatness of Yosef, and he gives over all that he learned from Shem and Ever to Yosef, specifically because he knows this child is going to save the Jewish people. What about the brothers? Perhaps Yaakov was thinking that the brothers being so great will be able to get over that jealousy. And to get over that, says the Gemara, you think your son's great and your other son's great and this son will get over it? Yeah. But don't ever distinguish between one son and another. Whether you think that each one can handle it, yeah, but you can't do that. That's not on you. There's so much going on over here. I think there's so many moving pieces, but perhaps we can understand Yaakov's behavior to a certain level, whereby, yes, Yosef's behavior was inappropriate. And yes, V'hu nar, because he was a nar, but ultimately he was going to lead the Jewish people out of exile by setting up the system to enable them to go out of Egypt, and ultimately leads to the Exodus and Matan Torah and Har Sinai and all that. But Yaakov was able to see that vision, and the brothers kind of never really, felt that. Hence the hatred, hence the Gemara, where a person shouldn't make that distinction. Okay, I think we'll stop there. And then you're muted.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a good night, everyone.
Jacobo, see you next week.